A quick video to talk about the input function, or a way to get information from the user that you then want to use in your program. So we use what's called the input. It's a function. We'll talk about functions in chapter 5, I think it is. But basically, you type a message inside the function. So that's the parameter that it needs, is what is your message, and then it is always going to return a string data type. Always returns a string data type. That's important to know and remember. So I need to capture what the user typed, and so in this case I'm putting it into a variable called name, and then I'm simply going to print the name. So notice here I put a colon and a space, not mandatory, but it makes it a little nicer so that when you type your name, it's not boop, right up against your message. And then of course when I hit enter, it prints howdy and then the variable name. So the question becomes, well, if it always returns a string data type, what if I want a user to enter numeric values? For instance, I want to ask them how many hours they've worked or what's their pay rate, things like that. So let's take a look at that. You have two data conversion functions. It will take a string, which we'll put in here in between the parentheses, and convert it to an integer, or you can have one that takes a string and converts it to a float, as long as the string is of a type that can be converted. So one way of doing that, you can say input, how many hours did you work? Notice I have that space. We're going to store that information into a variable. That is going to be a string. And then right here, I want to do math. For whatever reason, I want to double the hours. So I want to multiply it by 2. So I will convert this to an integer, and that will double the hours. So let's go ahead and run it. Let's say you work 10 hours. Oh, I forgot to print the answer. Let's try that again. So how many hours did you work? Let's say we put 10, and then you will print out the fact that you have double the 20 hours. Notice what happens if I forget to do the int function, because what does an input box always return? It's a string. So I'll leave that there. Let's run it again. How many hours did you work? 10. All of a sudden you get 10, 10. It's like, what is going on with that? Right? You multiply by 2, it's not happy with the fact that this is a string. It doesn't know how to multiply a string. What it does is display the string twice. One more example of a problem that can happen. Let's put our int function back where we convert the hours to an integer. But what if your user types something goofy for the hours? So instead of typing a number, they type a string. Well, then you'll get an error because the int function doesn't know how to convert that. Okay, it has to be able to convert the string into an integer, and if the string is something that's non-numeric, well, then it can't do it. Now, I've spent a couple minutes here talking about this example, and here's the problem. Hours is a string. Every time I want to use it, I'm going to have to convert it to an integer. And let's say further down in my program, I'm doing more math. I have to convert it to an int, convert it to an int, convert it to an int. Every time I use this variable and I want to do mathematical things with it, I'm going to have to convert it to an int. And that's kind of a pain in the butt to have to do an int function every time on that variable. So a better solution for this is, why don't we convert it to an int right away? So I have two examples here. Whoops, I'm going to have 3 quotes to block this out. So rather than convert hours to an integer after the fact, you can put what I call wrap your entire input function in the int conversion. So right now, whatever they type will immediately be converted to an integer, and then I'm storing that integer. And throughout the rest of the program, I can just use hours like normal. I don't have to keep converting it every time I want to use it. The other type of data conversion is a float. So if you want your users to enter something that will have a decimal value to it, like 15.75, then you would use the float to convert that string. So throughout the quarter, you will be using these two functions a lot. Let me go ahead and type print, I'll just put hours, comma, pay rate. And in both times, maybe I'll multiply by 10 just so we can see the effect of the math. There we go. So now let's clear our shell down here, run. How many hours did you work? 40, enter. And what is your pay rate? 15.75, enter. Oh. And this is me being bad. I have a typo. So let's try that again. I'm going to clear my shell one more time. 10, enter, 15.75. And now you're seeing those being multiplied by 10 and in both cases. So from this point on, I can just use those without having to convert them every time. And one more time, take note how I have that space right there. If you were to not put in the space, things still work. It just doesn't look quite as nice in your output. I will go ahead and run that. So notice your cursor's right up against the question mark when you type the 10, and it's right up against the question mark when you type the 15.75. Works fine, just doesn't look quite as nice as if you put the space and then the quote. So that's it on the input function. My experience is the number one error that students make around it is forgetting that it always returns a string data type until you convert it using one of the data conversion functions, float or int.